I'm Cammy Davis. I'm an artist and a designer, and I'm going to do a tutorial for you today on how to take up an item that you find at a yard sale or Goodwill or Salvation Army, or I like to call them vintage stores, and to make it into an interesting piece of art. So lately I've been picking up these little boxes at vintage stores, and this is the one that I've decided to cover today. I have the images that I want to put onto it, and I'm using images of my artwork and paintbrush, foam roller, Podge, which I use for collaging. There's other brands, some sandpaper, scissors. I got a flat bowl of water big enough to fit my images into it, and then a towel. So the first thing I'm going to do is just going to rough up. I've already washed the box, but I'm just going to rough it up, the surface that I'm going to collage on, just a little. So now it's ready to collage, and I'm going to start by cutting my pieces. I've kind of laid out, and I think the image I have is going to be big enough. I try to make sure of that before I start something. So I'm going to leave just enough to be able to turn it over the edge and cover the edges on this. So I'm just going to cut around it. I'm a messy artist. I have to pick that up later. I think I'm going to go ahead and just cut just a little snip where the corners are, so that when I'm Mod Podging it, I can just bend those over. I'm going to put this into the water, and my image into the water flat, and just let it soak for 20 or 30 seconds. It doesn't have to be very long, but just long enough to soften it a little bit. And I'm going to put my Mod Podge. I'm just going to do it on the top of the lid, and then I'll do the sides after I get that part in place. I'm just putting a coat of the Mod Podge onto the lid. Okay, so I'm going to take my image out and just lay it on the towel just for a second to get the biggest pieces of water off. And then as I lay it down, I want to be really careful not to manipulate it too much, or it will get little creases and stuff in it. But I want to try to lay it down flat. That looks pretty good. And especially with this one, because it has lines, I want to make sure it lines up parallel with the lines of the box. And then I'm just going to get my little foam roller wet, and then just carefully, without moving it, just roll any of the air bubbles out. And then I'm just going to set it aside to dry. So I'm going to do just one side at a time. I'm going to go ahead and cut these down a little shorter to where they won't hang over quite so much. So I have two that are that long, and I'll start with those. So I'm going to put both of those into the water for a second, and I think I'll go ahead and cut my shorter sides. The shorter sides, I think I'm going to cut exactly to the side of the box, since the other ones are wrapping around. So now I'm going to go ahead and take these out, the ones I've had soaking, and just put the Mod Podge on the first side that I'm going to do. And just put my first image down. This is easier because I'm not having an overhang, so it makes it easier to line up. And then I'm going to do the same thing with my roller. There's bugs out here today. Meanwhile, I'm going to do a little bit of work on the lid, because this at this point has dried as well. So I'm going to start folding over the edges of the lid, and it's just the same procedure I did on the corners here. I'm going to put the Mod Podge onto the paper as well as the lid, and then just start bending it over with my fingers. And the biggest thing is just being really careful that you don't take the image off with your fingers. I do find when I do the corners or the edges like this, they're a little bit more difficult, and part of it is because I'm not getting it wet in the water again, and part of it is because they're bending around, so they're kind of being crankier, I guess. I don't know a better way to describe it. So that's sticking pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and put Mod Podge on here, on this top of this one as well, because I think that's going to keep it stuck down there pretty good, and even it out so I don't get big globs of it. There's a glob there, so I'm going to get that off. Okay, so that's working pretty good. I'm just going to check all the edges and make sure they're all sticking down. Because I have to do that now while it's wet. Once it dries, it gets really, like the paper gets really stiff and you can't get it to stick after that. It kind of ruins it. Okay, got all mine down. I'm going to wipe any glue that I have off. Glue, or Mod Podge, I sometimes refer to it as glue, but it's the Mod Podge that I'm using. And I did see a recipe online where you can make it yourself, and it is actually made from glue. I think it's watered down glue. I tried it, for me it didn't work as good. They must have something chemical and stuff in this stuff to make the Mod Podge to make it work so good. And now one thing you want to do is if you're Mod Podging on edges where it could stick, if you set it down and it could stick, is you want to set it on top of something. And of course I didn't pre-plan, so I'm going to go grab something to set it on. Okay, so I often just use paint cans or glasses or cups or whatever because I'm not getting anything on it, so I'm just going to set it on top. And since it is sitting there, the sides have Mod Podge, I'm going to go ahead and put the first top coat on the top of it. So this is what people are really going to see when they look at the box, so I'm going to really be careful on this to make sure that I don't, you know, have any ugly streaks or thick lines or anything of the Mod Podge. So I just take a little extra time and make sure it looks good. Okay, we'll let that dry. Hi, Emmy. Emmy helps me with all of my artwork. I need one more coat on my lid and one more coat on here, and then this will be finished. I'm going to let it, when I'm doing the final layer, I always let it dry completely overnight because I don't want to take a chance on ruining it at that point. And I just think it gives all the layers a chance to really harden up. And especially if you're like wrapping it for a gift or sending it somewhere, you want to make sure it's all the way dry. I'm just going to go put one more kind of thick coat on my lid. Kind of hard to try to balance these things sometimes when you're painting them, and you know, I just like I'm holding it from the bottom or wherever I can without getting my fingerprints on it. Just going slow enough that I don't tip it. So that one looks good. Paint my final coat on this one. I want to make sure, because I just cut this edge, I just want to make sure that the Mod Podge goes over it a little bit. I don't want to paint the whole top because then when I put the lid on it'll kind of stick together. I'll make sure I didn't drip any down there. That looks good. Of course I got some on myself because I always do. And I should have brought a glass out to set this one on top of as well so it doesn't stick. Like if I set it down on here it would stick to it when it dries. So I'm just going to put the lid back on my Mod Podge since I'm done. Can you hear the neighbor kids screaming? Okay, so got the lid on, kind of. There we go. Now we get the lid on. So then I'm just going to set this on top of here and let it dry. Make sure it's balanced and just kind of check everything one last time for drips. Ooh, and I do see one. I'm always glad when I look one last time. That seems to always be when I catch the drip. So I'm going to try to get some of the water out of this and just, ooh, smooth that drip out a little bit. Sometimes if it's too thick it will also kind of start dripping, so you can just, if you do it soon enough, you can run your brush across it. If you wait too long though, it actually just ruins it, so if it's been drying for a while, just don't mess with it. Just let it have a drip. Oh. And if you have any questions, just go to my website and send me an email. My website is cammydavis.com, which is C-A-M-M-Y Davis.com. Thanks. Okay, so this is the final product. I let it dry overnight and now I've set it on my nightstand and I like the way it turned out. I think it's a real simple box, and yet with my artwork it's just made it look different than what you see elsewhere. I'm probably going to put jewelry in it or business cards or something. I've been needing something for my business cards. The only thing of note that I wanted to mention is I had been doing this project outside, which I usually do projects in my studio, which is also known as the garage. But when you're working with clear things like Mod Podge or polyurethane or varnish or whatever, you want to be careful to do it someplace where dust isn't blowing. And I don't think you can probably see it with my video camera, but just one little piece of dust right there got into the top of it. So I'll make sure in the future that I continue doing that inside. So just a note for you when you're working on your project. I hope you have fun with this, and I hope that you come up with some cool art objects for your home.